Making sure you get a hold of your foster or adopted kid's file when it's possible is important, and let me tell you why. Hello, my name is Lauren, and this channel is called Lauren Fosters, where we talk about all things foster care and adoption related. And this video stems from a comment I've seen a couple times come up on various foster care and adoption pages that I'm part of. Did you know that in some cases with foster care, and I don't know how this works in the private adoption world and with those agencies, but I will say in some places in the foster care world, you are able to waive your child's file. And what I mean by that is sometimes for the sake of getting an adoption to happen a little bit faster, so parental rights have already been terminated. We're not talking about trying to end a case or anything like that, or push a case along faster. What I'm talking about is you're at the end of the case. The parental rights have already been terminated, and now you're going through, a lot of times in most places, some sort of waiting period for adoption. Some parents are given the option to waive their child's file so they can adopt sooner. And I guess the idea there is that it's gonna take a while to prepare the file, or maybe it's just taking a while for the file to become available. And so for the sake of moving things along quicker and getting an adoption date on the docket, they'll offer you to be able to waive your child's file. In other words, not view it and maybe not get a copy for those of you that are in places that are able to get a copy. I feel like I just said a lot of really confusing things to people that might be new to foster care, so let me explain a little bit further. So when a child's in foster care, a case is building. I'd imagine this also works in the adoption world when you're, maybe when you're getting a case that's straight adopt through foster care, or even in private adoption as far as like domestic adoption and international adoption, there is some sort of case file somewhere that tells everything they know thus far about the child. So I'd imagine with international adoption, for example, it's maybe if they have any information on the parents or the family members of this child, or any known illnesses in the family, or where this child is originally from, and so on. And in the foster care world, of course, it's things like why the child was removed. Also, if the child has any known medical issues, or maybe what medical issues may run in the family. It'll have things like court details and maybe even statements from the biological family or whoever the children were removed from, and maybe even some witnesses inside. So usually somewhere there is some sort of file with information on this child. Did that clear up any questions you may have had up to this point? So as I was saying earlier, in some places, and I know this isn't the case everywhere, but it definitely exists, you are able to waive your ability to have your hands on those files or even view them to get an adoption date to happen faster. There are places that will allow you to view the file, but not to take any pictures, not to make any copies, and they will not give you a copy of the file. Perhaps there are some places even where you don't look at the file at all, but everywhere I've lived so far, you do look at the child's file. It's actually something you need to sign off in order to adopt. And only in one of our cases ever were we offered a copy of that file. Now, maybe you're watching this and you're saying like, we're always given our file. I don't know what you're talking about. Well, then you may live in a state or somewhere that offers that kind of thing, but that's not always the case. But I wanted to make this video to heavily encourage you. This is a PSA. Listen to me here. If you can view that child's file, or even better, if you can get your hands on a copy of that file, whether it's a paper file or some sort of digital copy, please do so. And here's why. I'm a former foster youth myself, and I still to this day have a copy of my file, and I treasure that. Not because I sit there and I mull over it and because I want to revisit those things, but because that's a whole chunk of my life, and I don't even remember some of those things. And in fact, some of the case details in there, I didn't even know about until I read my own file. Some of the statements by judges or biological parents are all things I was introduced to by reading my own file. So anytime I see a foster or adoptive parent ask the question, should I go ahead and waive this to make things happen quicker? I get the heart behind that. And the heart behind that, in case you're watching this and thinking like, why would anybody ever choose to do that knowing how important that file may be, is that they want to create some sort of permanency a little bit quicker. And I totally get that. Like when a child's really gone through the ringer, when they have trauma issues related to lack of permanency because maybe they've been moved around a lot or they've been in the system for a really long time, it's really understandable that a foster parent would push towards adoption to happen a little bit quicker so that that permanency can happen a little faster in order for this child to start healing and to start going through the grieving process and all the things that happen when things do get finalized, but also the good things of feeling like they have a permanent place to belong. So I totally do understand the heart behind it, but I do want to heavily encourage you for a couple of reasons. If you read the file, a lot of times they do have a sign off on them because there may be things in the file that may discourage you from adopting. I would really hope that's not the case for most of you. A lot of times these kids look horrible on paper. There's things you're gonna read and see, and that's why they want you to look at it before adoption, to kind of go, hey, is any of this a deal breaker? Like, if you haven't known any of this up to this point, is reading this now going to change your mind? Because once you sign on that paper, once the adoption's finalized, there's no going back. They want you to be really informed on your child and really prepared for that moment. With that said, I do want to encourage those of you who maybe haven't read through one of those files yet and maybe you're looking towards adoption, don't be surprised if you see things you really didn't know before, even though you thought you maybe understood the case really, really well. I would hate for any of you to feel like you were duped and weren't given appropriate information. I think that happens more rarely. I think by the time a child has gone through the whole process of a case and now you're moving towards adoption, a lot of times it's the foster parent that was fostering them adopting. Sometimes there are cases where a child is being adopted from maybe somebody who's gotten licensed to adopt them that wasn't their full-time caregiver the whole time they were in care. So maybe they haven't had the adequate time to get to know this child, or maybe they were only given partial pieces of information. So once again, that's why it would be really important to view that file, because you want to make sure that you're really informed and you know what you're signing up for. But like I said, there are a couple of times that things on paper looked horrible for a couple of my children, and I will tell you that I look back and I have no regrets on adopting my kiddos, and I'm so glad they're part of my family to this day. Once again, sometimes things look worse on paper than they are in real life, so just something to keep in mind. And disclaimer, I know that's not the case for everybody, and I know that there are parents really struggling, feeling like I had no idea what I was getting into when I signed up for this, and my heart goes out to you if that's your story. But I know in our story, some of the things we saw on paper would have made other parents hightail and just run out of there, and it didn't stop us, and I'm so glad to this day that it didn't. But as far as getting your hands on that file, if you can. So if you find out that by waiving being able to view their file also means that you could have obtained a copy of that file and you waive that, I think you're really doing a discredit to your child who may want that file someday. I think a lot of us are fairly open about the whole adoption thing, and I know that's not everybody's story, but I know in our house we're really, really open about adoption and foster care, and so my kids know that there was a court involved and that they were removed for a reason, and so them having that documentation that they can look at someday to kind of just have for themselves that piece of their story that may have just really like been during a time where maybe they were too young to remember, or there was too much going on that they just didn't know about, but just having that piece of time of their life documented on paper, that is going to be something that's so important to them someday. So if you are able to somehow get your child's file, I just can't encourage it enough. So really, that's all this video was here to talk about. Those of you that had the question, should I get my child's file if at all possible, or should I just waive it for the sake of permanency and moving this thing along? I know how important permanency is, but I also can tell you from experience, I know how important that file is. So please consider getting it if you can get a hold of it.